Hi everyone, today we're going to go through the creative writing section of AQA Language Paper 1, which is the creative writing element of the paper. In this video, I'm going to go through how to plan each response, both the image-based response and the statement-based response, and to give you a little bit of a flavour of what you should be including and how to go about including it. So to start off with, I'm just going to have a quick look at what AQA are actually saying you should be doing at the top end. So for level 4, to get those grade 7 to 9, no, it says 8 there, but grade 7 to 9, your writing should be compelling, assured, crafted, inventive and varied. Basically what that means is you need to think about the devices that you're using in your expression, how you're using them, where you're using them and why you're using them. What effect do you want to create? How do you want your writer to feel? How do you want them to react to certain things? Because don't forget, writing isn't just words on a page, it's about the experience that writers create. And as exam candidates and as writers, that is what is expected of you. So that's in terms of content. That's your AO5. Your AO6, your technical accuracy, your SPAG. Again, in order to get into that highest band, that level 4, 13 to 16 marks, you need to be consistently secure and accurate, using a full range of appropriate sentence forms, punctuation, vocabulary for effect. Now, I'm just going to zoom in ever so slightly on the sentence types. You should aim, you should look, if you look, there are grades attached to each type of sentence. Now that is, if you were to use just simple sentences in your work, you'd gain a grade 2. However, that's not to say if you used non-finite clauses, ing clauses with semicolons throughout your work, you'd gain a grade 6. It's the sophistication of the sentences that we're looking at here. And again, you should aim to include a variety of these sentences in your work, which I'm going to go through a little bit later on. But for now we know what's expected of us, let's get having a go at it. So, if we look at our 2 questions, our 2 tasks that were given here. You're advised to spend 45 minutes on this section, you must write in full sentences, and you're reminded that you need to plan your answer. That is exactly what we're going to do. Now, I always recommend going for the image-based question, for the simple fact it gives you something to focus on. So let's have a go at describing this image and planning this image. So a website has asked for examples of creative writing for its new page. Of course they have. Websites are always asking for such things. Note my sarcasm, I apologise. But what we're going to look at is the reason they've established that is it gives you a purpose. You just say, describe this image, which would be fine. However, it's giving you a purpose. And again, examples of creative writing, that is what you're expected to produce, an example of creative writing. So write a description based on this picture. In terms of planning, what I want you to try and do is I use what I call the zooming method. Now, the zooming method takes into account the entire picture and gets you to focus on specific elements. Now, for this particular example, I've used crowd, person, internal feelings. However, it basically attains to the setting, an individual or specific focus, and then implied personal feelings, internal feelings. Now, obviously, if you've just got an element of an object or a place, the internal feelings, you are going to have to use personification. You are going to be thinking about personifying your area. So we start off by describing the setting or the crowd. What is going on in that setting? Is anything moving? Take in the whole picture. What is it like? Establish what it's like to be there. And again, set your scene. An extended metaphor running throughout your piece will near enough, done correctly, ensure you get up into at least that level 3. Moving on from the initial setting, looking at a particular person. Now, all narratives, regardless of what they are, now, while we're not writing a narrative, it's worth pointing out that in terms of description, we have to establish, it's useful to establish the basics. So a setting, and obviously a person or a particular focus. So in this case, we're going to be looking at the person as it says. What do they look like? What are they doing? How do they feel? Again, an extended metaphor would be useful to continue. And then finally, now you look at internal feelings. Now, my advice to you is to write 5 paragraphs. Now, me saying that, you're going to think, well, hang on, he's only getting me to plan 3 things. That's where your personal discretion comes in. Where are you going to add the extra? Where are you going to add the extra paragraphs? Where are you going to add the extra detail? Okay? And finally, again, is it going to be that internal feeling section? Or are you going to develop the setting slightly? Or are you going to look at the person? That is entirely up to you. Now, the reason I say 5 paragraphs is 4 paragraphs potentially is too little. Any more than 5 paragraphs is too much and you could be waffling slightly. So 5 paragraphs, 5 is the magic number for that. So let's have a go at using the zooming method to plan our response to the image. So first of all, we need to take into account the whole area. So our number 1, okay? So our number 1, what can we see? Well, it's a scene of devastation, quite honestly. But look at the entire picture itself. So if we're looking at the crowd, so to speak, and the actual setting and looking at that extended metaphor, it's a beach. Beaches should be happy. Beaches should be pleasant places, relaxing places. However, a storm has obviously hit and devastated the area. So your extended metaphor could be the beach itself. So the beach, okay? Now, it's devastated, okay? It's a disaster, okay? So beach is devastated, it's a disaster. And again, it's broken, okay? The happiness is broken. The happy times are broken. Maybe even reflect back to happier times to now. So your happier times, again, were bright, fun, etc. Describe the beach as it was, and then go on to describe it as now. So your bright and the bright and fun could be your number 1. We remember a time when. Your number 2 could be the now. So the description of now. Okay? Now, what do we want to focus into in this particular image? Now, there are a couple of options. Personally, rather than going with the person, I would go with this particular house here as our, in this case, number 3. Now, our number 3, this house is tilted, okay? It's been knocked over. Think about an extended metaphor that you could establish for that. In terms of it being broken and being a disaster, well, think of it as it's being knocked down. It's been punched, it's been in a fight, it's been in a physical altercation. So, in terms of number 3, I'm just going to do this down here. So, number 3, it's knocked down, can't get up. Maybe you want to use a boxing analogy. So in terms of disaster, broken happiness, again, it could be a defeated fighter maybe. Okay? Entirely up to you. So that's our number 3. And number 4, again, the person this time, linking in, number 4. Now, let's quickly establish, who is that person? Considering you stood outside a house that's been beaten, that's been broken, I'm going to say that's the owner of the house. So, obviously, the owner of the house, what's he doing? Describe his actions. Well, he's looking at it. Looking at the house. But how is he looking at the house? Does he have a tear in his eye? Is he, I'll put it here, reflecting to happier times? Again, think about contextualization. Now, this is a description, not a narrative. It's not a story. So you aren't going to move from this particular place, this particular image. However, you can make reference to things outside of the image Just make sure you stay wholly focused on what is in front of you. Okay? Now, finally, our fifth paragraph, circle his head, our fifth paragraph that I'll do down here are his internal feelings. So his internal feelings. Now, obviously, he is, like the house, devastated. Like the house, he is devastated. And again, he might be broken. Now that is a really, really nice link in terms of descriptive link, in terms of just linking all of your ideas back together again. So I'm going to go with that. I'm going to go with the fact that he's also devastated, as well as the beaches, as well as the houses. There's your extended metaphor, devastation. So my extended metaphor, I'm going to use as a personified disaster. So this disaster has come in and disrupted everything. Okay. Right, so now we have our plan. And again, this, in any exam, is yours to write on. Please write on it, annotate it, scribble on it, scribble out ideas. But you need to have a very clear plan of where you're going to go and what you're going to do. You might deviate from it, you might develop certain elements, but please make sure that you have a clear plan. And again, this is yours to do with whatever you need to do with. Just please don't start scribbling and drawing funny cartoons, because unfortunately, they're not going to get you the marks, are they? So, now we've got our plan, we need to be thinking about our structure and how we're going to structure our piece. Now, this is something that's worth thinking about and something that's worth taking into consideration. I've looked at developing tension. However, potentially you don't necessarily have to develop tension, you can develop feeling or emotion. So if we have another quick look at our image, if we're talking about the description, so number one, description of the scene, we are going to use long, complex, multi-clausal sentences because we need to describe the setting, we need to set the scene. Bearing in mind, your examiner will read several hundred of these pieces of the same potential question. They will read several hundred of them. You need to do something and really do something that really creates that vivid image in their minds. And again, by doing that, you're going to use, in order to do that, you're going to use a variety of different sentence types. So in the beginning, which is our description. Now this again does reference a narrative, however, it can be used in exactly the same way for a description. You've got your long multi-clausal sentences. Those are your grade 5 and grade 6 sentences, okay? They're used to really, really describe and go into lots and lots of detail. Your development, so our moving into the number 3 and potentially number 4, so focusing on specific things, you go complex sentences beginning with subordinate clauses and adverbs. So again, that's our grade 5, grade 4 sentences. Now the reason you do that is you're beginning to bring in an element of emotion, an element of different perspective. And finally, our resolution, our final moments. So our internal thoughts, internal feelings. You're looking at more compound and shorter complex sentences, even simple sentences. Again, build that sense of tension, build that sense of panic, of regret, of unknown for the person. Because again, think about it, his house has been destroyed. Everything, all his items are in there. His life is in there. It's been destroyed. It's sinking. It's been devastated. He's broken, as is his home. He's going to be considering all of his options all at once. Reflect that uncertainty in his fragmented state of mind. Okay? And don't forget about your vocabulary. I've already mentioned about the extended metaphor, the personification of disaster. If you don't use anything else, please, as a core set of devices to focus on, please make sure you're using similes, personification, and metaphor, especially an extended metaphor, if you don't use anything else. Again, you've got other options such as anthropomorphism, zoomorphism. If you don't know what those are, Google is your friend. Elements such as oxymorons and various different other types of poetic language that you can use. However, at the core, similes, personification and metaphor are going to form a decent enough basis for you to at least break into that level 3. And again, even push it, especially if you're using decent extended metaphors, push it towards that level 4 and that consistent and that level of manipulation, compelling, assured, and crafting. Okay? And our little vocab rating here of wow, so on board. Obviously, you want to be at the top. Obviously, you want to be at the wow. You want to make sure that your vocabulary is hard-hitting, compelling, interesting. Think about the words that you're using. Think about the adjectives, the adverbs that you're using, the verbs that you're using. Okay? Another top tip from me, please start sentences with either ing clause or adverb starting sentences. Please do not start any sentences with start any paragraphs with a sentence that starts with it, the, etc. because it is dull, it's boring, it's uninspired. So what I'm going to have a go at now with you is, now that I've got my plan, now that I've got some ideas down, I'm going to have a go at writing the first paragraph, the first little section. You have to excuse me a sec. So we're going to have a go at writing the first section of this description. I keep calling it a narrative. This description. Okay? So I'm going to zoom out slightly. I'll just model how to do that. Now, the resources are available again on my Twitter, that'll be in the description. Or, again, if you're in mid-tech, this is on Show My Homework, or can be made available to you. Just ask your English teacher to ask me, or come and ask me yourself, and I'll sort you out with them. So, we're going to make a start. So, we're focusing on the setting, first of all. So, if I just get our little plan again, we're going to focus on the crowd, stroke, setting. Okay? So, it's a disaster. It's fairly, I'd say that's more like Twilight or the ending of a storm. So let's dive straight in with some personification. So, grim and grey clouds approach the scene, bringing with them the sadness and disappointment that can only come from losing everything. Okay, straight away. Focused on the setting, focused on the clouds. Grim and grey clouds approach the scene, bringing with them the sadness and disappointment that only comes, from losing everything. Okay? So, we've got the setting. Now, let's bring that grim and grey and the clouds and the disappointment. There is our pathetic fallacy, which can, if you prefer to use that as an extended metaphor, bring it all the way through. Let's continue in the first paragraph. So what else can we see? We've got the clouds, bring with them sad of losing everything. So let's have a look at the beach. Once a place filled with the joys of summer, where families, friends, and friends come to live their best lives, now is a place of disaster, a place for the broken, a place where happiness is no longer welcome. A little depressing, granted, but there you go. We're continuing with the grim and grey. It certainly is grim, certainly is grey. Now notice my complex sentences. Let's get an ing clause, ing non-finite clause sentence in there just to finish off. So, leaning in defeat, sinking ever lower into its own sense of loathing, wishing the storm had never arrived. No, wishing the storm had never reared its ugly head. The summer home sank into itself, defeated, miserable, and full of regret. And there you go. And there is your opening. Okay? Now granted, that isn't the best piece I've ever written. However, this is the type of thing that you need to be thinking about. You need to be thinking about what you're writing, how you're writing, why you're writing it. Granted, this image isn't the best, but it's probably a lot better than you'll actually get in the exam. Now, again, if we just have a quick look at the diagram. So in the beginning, long, complex, multi-clausal sentences to set the scene, to really develop. We've got there, we've got one, the beach, we've got two, a place for the broken. Now, I've put in a place for the broken, a place. I've put a little bit of repetition in there, and a place for the broken, etc. I put a few simple sentences in there just to break it up, and then I've gone back into a long multi-clausal non-finite clause sentence just to, as I say, break it up a little bit, but to really give that impact. Again, mix in different types of sentences to really add the impact. Again, I've chosen to use the repetition of place and the semantic field of sadness and the element of broken in there to really emphasize the impact that this storm, the negative impact that this storm has had. Okay, so there's the beginning and introduction for a descriptive piece for a picture. Let's now have a look at, if we can zoom in, we're going to have to zoom in a little bit here, for the story element. Okay. Now the story element is going to be slightly different in terms of planning, slightly different in terms of the way that we're going to approach it. Only slightly different though. So it's asking us to write a story. I'm just writing this down because I've used all my space. A story that begins with the sentence "It was a disaster. I didn't know what to do." Now, there is absolutely no reason why you would not use the image to help you. However, please do not base your entire narrative, your entire story on the image, because you're confusing tasks, okay? And there's an exceptional chance that you would be penalized for that, all right? So write a story that begins with the sentence, "It was a disaster, I didn't know what to do." Now, this is a perfect example or a perfect opportunity to look at the idea of a reflective narrative. Now, when I talked about, again, the planning before and I alluded to the narrative structure. So you've got your introduction, which is usually a description of setting, okay? So you describe your setting. Now, we've got the story that begins with, "It was a disaster." Now, a disaster here, our crisis point, I'll explain this narrative structure in a second, we're going to start here and we're going to do a reflective narrative, okay? So we've got our reflective narrative. So the crisis is going to be, I'm going to say, the disaster hits. Now, looking at this, I'm saying it's a storm because it's at a beach and whatnot, kind of makes a bit more sense. However, it could be an earthquake. So the crisis is the earthquake, and it's a nice way to get those different sentences in there, actually. An earthquake, again, it could be the destruction of a house or a building, okay? Now, we've got our description of setting. Number two, we need some rising action. Now, when we say rising action, something is happening. So something happens. So if we're going with the earthquake idea, shakes, tremors, okay? But they begin. And again, we can have a sharp, so they begin, and then you can have a sharp increase, okay? We've got up to the crisis, which we'll reflect back at, and then we've got the falling action. Now the falling action, what we mean by the falling action, is the problem, the crisis, begins to solve itself. Now, if we're talking about an earthquake, fairly easily, the shakes subside. And again, here, the ending, left with a shell of what? Okay, so a shell of a building, a shell of integrity, whatever you want to go. So, as I say, we're going to look at a reflective narrative. So we're going to start at the crisis. We're going to start, in fact, no, we're not. We're going to start just before the crisis. So we're going to start here. So the shakes, the tremors, are just beginning to pick up to the stage where things are starting to happen. So we go with number one just there. We'd start with number two. Again, your setting now needs to be a calm setting. Okay, we need to go back to it being quite calm. We need to go to it being quite calm, and then we build ourselves back up again. So number three, number four, and then the number 5 paragraph there. So let's have a quick go at looking at the opening to this. So it's starting. So again, we're starting just before the crisis. A bell's about to go off. Please do ignore it. It does sound like a fire alarm. We're in no immediate danger. Don't worry. So we're going to start with walls began to crumble. Lights began to falter. And there was the bell. Lights begin to falter. Panic ensues. So what I've done there is I've started with 3 simple sentences to really build the idea of tension right from the beginning. So, the fact that it's in first person, now it says to begin with, in fact, just realise that. Now, if you do this, it's absolutely fine. Go back and put it in. So, it was a disaster, I didn't know. So this is obviously written in first person. Know what to do. Stick a colon in. Walls began to crumble. Lights began to falter. Panic ensues. And there you go. There's the opening for that. That bell means ultimately I've got to get out of the building, otherwise I'm going to be locked in. So, just to quickly recap then. Really quick recap. If you're doing the picture description, which I highly recommend, make sure that you seriously consider using the zoom-in method. Okay, I'll leave that there for you to just take a quick screenshot of if you need to, just to get the idea of what's going on. And again, if you're using the narrative, if you're going to create your story, make sure you're using the narrative progression of the introduction of setting, your rising action, your crisis point, your falling action, and your ending. Again, I'll leave that there for you to take a quick screenshot of if you can read my scribbles. And as always, make sure whenever you're writing, you focus on effect, thinking about how you're deliberately going to craft and make the reader, the examiner, your teacher, whoever it is, feel a certain way. And reflect that through your structural choices and your vocabulary choices. So again, don't forget, use these types of sentences. If there is panic, short, compound sentences, really build that pace, succession of short sentences. If it's slightly calmer, more descriptive, or things start to calm down, get in those longer, complex sentences. And again, you can do it that way. I know it's upside down. It's deliberately upside down. Start with lots of panic and it gradually smooths out and gradually begins to calm down. Or it starts nice and calm and gradually something happens. The crisis hits, people panic, things begin to happen. Again, pace is your friend in this particular case. And I focus mainly on structure because vocabulary is something that we do quite well. And we tend to focus on more of a structure. I know SPAG and your sentences are only worth 16 marks, but those can make a massive difference. But at the bare minimum, use an extended metaphor. Make sure you're using personification and get those similes in there as a basic. And don't forget, for my students, so I'm talking about me, and I know the examiners want the same, we want to be wowed. We want to be affected by your writing. So, with the exams coming up fairly soon, again, this is 22nd of March 2019, so we're only about 5-6 weeks away from the exam starting. Best of luck to everybody. I'll hopefully post some more, maybe analysis. I might do a couple of videos on maybe a few more examples of writing, maybe non-fiction writing, but I'm definitely going to come up with fairly soon some analysis-based videos to help you out with your language analysis so you succeed. So that's it from me. Thank you for clicking. Please do, if you find this useful, share it with somebody. Again, I'm not, as I've said before, I'm not one for likes, subscribes, etc. That doesn't bother me as long as it's reaching the people and it's helping people. Okay? So, best of luck. If you do any pieces and want me to have a look at them, please do take a picture of them and tweet them to me, and I'll give you some advice. I'll give you some feedback. I look forward to seeing some of your work soon, and all the best.